21st century audio pioneer, Hartford Online Radio Network. onthehorn.com.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's News Talk Tonight. You're listening to News Talk Tonight on the Horn. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. News Talk Tonight is brought to you by Amazon.com, Gateway Financial Partners, Sandits Travel, Shepherd Technologies, Budwitz and Meyer Jack CPAs, Deepwater Seafood of Avon, and CentralCTDental.com. Well, it looks like Connecticut's going to have a comprehensive gun law. At least that's what the legislature wants us to believe. Also, apparently our state comptroller believes that the deficit is dropping. Good news? Really? And for those of you who are teenagers in Connecticut and live your life by getting tanned, it won't be Connecticut for much longer. Apparently there's a ban on tanning for minors that's moving forward, and our state representatives, or I should say our federal representatives for the state, are hard at work trying to prevent the power companies from increasing the rates that they are charging in order to make up for the loss that they've incurred from 7 storms over the last 2 years. And last but not least, despite the fact that we have a fair amount of bipartisanship going on right now with the gun control legislation, it appears as though there's still some partisan bickering. What's political life in Connecticut without a little partisan bickering? But first, this is basically, these are news stories that are called from our friends, ctnewsjunkie.com, Christine Stewart and company. I tend to write my own stuff based on these things, but I had a little problem with my office. It appears as though my internet has been down for the last, several days. That will be rectified tomorrow, but that means I wasn't able to do a whole lot of copywriting today. Nonetheless, I do have these wonderful stories. Dateline yesterday, the leadership and rank and file met in caucus for both parties in Connecticut. And it appears as though the framework for compromise on gun control has now been established. And it is entirely probable that we will be having a new law relatively soon relative to gun control. When rank-and-file lawmakers emerged from closed-door meetings at the Capitol on Monday, many weren't entirely happy with the post-Newtown gun control legislation package that had been hammered out on their behalf by the leadership. That is the nature, of course, of a bipartisan bill. No one gets everything that they want. But there is one thing that is certain. Those same rank-and-file lawmakers have said that the proposal was the most comprehensive package of gun control legislation in the country. I guess they didn't like being showed up by the folks in Albany and the folks in Denver. Said Senate President pro tempore Donald Williams, "In Connecticut, we've broken the mold. We just put together Democrats and Republicans in a bipartisan process on one of the most divisive issues in the United States." Senate Minority Leader John McKinney said that some lawmakers were still making up their minds on the bill, but that there was, quote, no doubt that the legislation would pass both chambers on Wednesday. Yep, that means we're having a vote tomorrow, folks. McKinney said that there was strong support among Senate Republicans, with the possible exception of one Senate Republican who happens to be from the senatorial district that I hail from, the 8th senatorial district. It remains to be seen whether Senator Kevin Whitkos, who has been given a ranking of 92% by the NRA, I'm kind of wondering whether he's going to actually vote in favor of this particular legislation or not. Said McKinney, I think we may have maybe around 50% of our caucus. That means 8 senators. The legislative leaders declined to say which side compromised on certain provisions during the negotiations, but they all agreed that they would be discouraging individual lawmakers from calling amendments during the debate on the bill Wednesday. House Speaker Brendan Sharkey also said that this would be the last piece of gun-related legislation raised in this session. He said that they may take up more mental health or school security issues this year, but debate over guns will end on Wednesday. Under Connecticut's legislation, House Minority Leader Lawrence Cafaro, Republican of Norwalk, said no one will lose their right to own a gun. However, going forward, in order to purchase a firearm, an individual will need a certificate and need to pass a background check if they want to purchase ammunition. The bill adds about 100 more weapons to Connecticut's assault weapons ban, which already includes 66 models. The legislation also bans the sale of high-capacity ammunition magazines. The legislation also allows residents who already own the magazines to keep them so long as they register them with the state police by January 1st, 2014. Under this bill, possession of an unregistered high-capacity magazine would be considered a Class D felony. Now, for those of you who aren't really privy to the various nuances of what is a misdemeanor and what is a felony means that you can be penalized by a fine of greater than $1,000, or you could be incarcerated for more than 1 year, or both. Class D felonies are the second lowest class of felonies. There are unclassified felonies that are the lowest, and those generally carry 1 to 5 years as far as possible incarceration and $1,000 to $5,000 as far as fines. There are some Class D felonies that can carry a $10,000 fine, but that's usually something that you see for the higher class felonies A, B, C. Now, what Representative Gary Holder Winfield, a Democrat from New Haven, said is, if you value bipartisanship, I believe it's the best possible bipartisan bill that you could get done. Talking about the legislation that's going to be debated tomorrow. Representative Peter Tertiak, a Democrat from New Britain, agrees. I think we generally have faith that this is the best deal that we're going to be able to get if we're going to pass something that is bipartisan. The prospective nature of the high-capacity magazine ban will come as a disappointment to families of the Newtown victims who lobbied lawmakers Monday as they ducked into their respective caucuses. Tertiak said that he would have liked the bill to be more assertive in banning magazines that people already own, but he said that he could live with the compromise of requiring people to register their magazines. Considering where so many people started, this is a satisfying place to end up. Holder Winfield said that he does not believe that there would be any change in the prospective nature of the high-capacity magazine ban. Given that the bill is a product of negotiations between all 4 of the legislative caucuses, he said that the legislation had to be written that way. I think with the process we had, a full ban might blow up the deal. Well, it was pretty clear from various reports that were coming out in the last 2 weeks that a full ban indeed would blow up the whole deal. The high-capacity magazine ban also prohibits gun owners and sportsmen from carrying a magazine with more than 10 bullets outside their home or outside a shooting range. So in other words, if you have one of these things, you either better get it home or get it to a firing range real quick, because you don't want to be caught in a car or other vehicle with the magazines after the bill is signed into law. Now, there isn't any indication as of yet from the governor's office as to whether or not he will sign the legislation. Chances are pretty good, however, given what he has stated on MSNBC, on CBS, and CNN, I'm not sure if he's talked to ABC yet or not, but if he hadn't, it hasn't been for a want of trying on his part. Given everything that he's said, I would find it very hard to believe that he would veto this piece of legislation, and it appears as though it has enough votes that even if there was a veto, that there would be an override. Now, there's also a provision that increases the penalties for any firearm trafficking and illegal possession of offenses and requires individuals who want to purchase a rifle to be 21 years old. It doesn't say that you can't possess a rifle at an age lower than 21. Maybe the final bill will say that. I don't know. It expands the look-back period for individuals who have been involuntarily confined or voluntarily admitted to a hospital for psychiatric disabilities. And this proposal has some gun advocacy groups crying foul. It's ludicrous to expect people that have firearms capable of holding 15 rounds to only load 10 rounds inside of them. Scott Wilson, president of the Connecticut Citizens Defense League. Do criminals really care about laws? Particularly these laws. Well, no, they don't. That's why they're criminals. But if we make it harder for them to be able to get stuff, then it's not so much that they'll think twice about not committing the crime, but it will make it harder for them to do it. So just because they don't respect the law doesn't mean that you don't pass the laws in the first place. That is, as Spock would say, highly illogical. Holder Winfield said that he believes that the number of proposals in the bill will help reduce gun violence, including registration of all firearms and tougher penalties for trafficking weapons. Handgun deaths are more common in urban areas than deaths attributed to semi-automatic rifles like the one used by the gunman at Sandy Hook. I think those types of things are significant, and it's understandable that people are upset about the fact that we don't deal with the full magazine ban, Holder Winfield said. But when you look at these things, what we have done is significant. And this is the same argument that Democrats were making after the passage of the Affordable Care Act. 1 second. It appears as though someone is calling. Hello? Would this be Brian?
Yes, it would. How are you, sir?
I knew you couldn't stay away from this. Oh my. Well, it appears as though the debate on the legislation is going to be tomorrow, and it's going to be limited to tomorrow. The Speaker of the House has already stated that this will be the last time that there will be any debate about gun control legislation, and it ends on Wednesday, was a quote. So,
wow.
Yep.
Because we don't want to have, debate about this sort of thing.
Well, tomorrow will be a debate, but legislative leaders are going to be encouraging individual lawmakers against making amendments. That could be interesting. The other thing is it's apparent that this bill is not as comprehensive as we were originally led to believe. By that I mean it doesn't deal with the mental health issues. It doesn't deal with school safety issues, at least not to the extent that we had come to understand was supposed to happen. The mental health stuff is going to have to come down a little later on in this session, apparently.
Interesting. What do you think about this? Do you think this is a good law?
I think that there are provisions in there that are good. I think that what they tried to cobble together as far as the high-capacity magazine is concerned is not so good. You're going to have a problem with enforcement.
Yeah.
And from the limited understanding that I have of the language of the bill, it appears as though you are not able to transport magazines. So pretty much as soon as the governor were to sign this into law, and we don't have any indication yet as to the governor's position, but as I said a little earlier on, given what he said to CNN, MSNBC, NBC, CBS, and I think maybe even ABC, he would look very foolish if he didn't sign this into law. So pretty much the second that the law is signed into being, you want to make sure that your magazines are going to be registered with the state police and that they stay put either at your house or at a firing range. Otherwise, you could be arrested for transporting a high-capacity magazine. I think that's a little ridiculous.
Well, how would you get your magazine from home to the gun club?
That's a good question, and it's unclear as to whether or not if you were to carry an unloaded magazine, whether that in and of itself would not be a violation of the law. One would hope that reason and logic would prevail and say, no, it's not a violation of the law. And that would be a way that you could legally transport then both the magazine and the ammunition from your home to a gun club or a firing range. But we're talking about the legislature being in session. Who said anything about reason and logic dictating anything? The legislation also creates a task force to study Connecticut's mental health system with a special focus on 16 to 25-year-old population. With all due respect, I think Connecticut has more task forces coming out the yin-yang than we have actual reports that mean anything like comprehensive legislation as a result. There's stuff that needs to be done like now about voluntary commitments, involuntary commitments, what a patient's rights can and should be under certain circumstances, and what kind of responsibility various people have in reporting behavior that would lead one to believe that someone was about to go off their rocker. And you're talking about some very significant individual rights that could very well be infringed upon with the potential legislation. So I can understand why they would want to duck for cover and toss this off to a task force. But really, what should be happening is the very thing that you were suggesting earlier. Why don't we debate? Why don't we just put something out there, debate it? While we're debating, we can continue to do research and figure out what is logical and fair under the circumstances. The legislature is falling all over itself right now over the fact that this is a bipartisan bill. Yippee.
Well, I don't know.
Yippee.
There's a lot of folks that I think are upset that we're trying to do this law so quickly, and it's being fueled by emotion. And in the meantime, we have other issues that are seriously jeopardizing the health of our state. And they have just been brushed aside during this entire time.
Consumed by the gun control debate. And there's no question in my mind that part of the motivation is the fact that Albany and Denver both put together pieces of legislation that, Albany, I think, was light years ahead of everybody. And, I mean, they just greased the skids and passed this piece of legislation that pretty much banned all forms of assault rifles, whether it was sports related or not. And had also high-capacity magazine restrictions. And look what happened to Governor Cuomo's popularity before and then after he signed the legislation into law. He dropped 15 points in 2 weeks.
Well, he's also, between him and Bloomberg, they're really taking away a lot of people's personal rights of just choice. It's kind of like they're making their own religion, and they're not calling it secular. They're just this is the way you're going to.
Uh-oh. I knew it. Oh, well. It appears as though we have indeed lost Brian for the moment. But not to worry. The fact of the matter is, like Brian was suggesting, there's emotion that is involved. How can you not feel a certain amount of emotion when 20 innocent children are gunned down, and gunned down in such a way that there was no way that they would survive? There was intent. And the 6 adults that were trying to protect them had no chance. And we're back with Brian. Hello there.
Hi.
I love technology. We can plan.
I'm getting some bad reception. Sorry about that.
We can plant a probe on Mars. We can actually run little robots on Mars, but we can't talk 15 miles apart. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Well, what are you gonna do?
I was following up on some of what you'd been suggesting. There's no question that the emotional impact of what happened in Newtown played a very big role in the creation of this particular piece of legislation. There's also no doubt that the gun control legislation that was passed in Colorado, as well as the gun control legislation in New York, had an impact on the need to get something done now, as opposed to carefully deliberating, debating, and reviewing over a period of time legislation that could still be comprehensive, but you wouldn't feel as though they greased the skids and whoosh, it's a law. Certainly nothing else in the legislature is going to be fast-tracked. We lost Brian again. Is going to be fast-tracked like what we had with the gun control legislation. And one could argue that the mental health provisions are the very things that should be fast-tracked, because we've been dealing with a mental health system that has been lagging behind both technology, pharmacological increases in our understanding of how drugs can interact, how drugs can act, how the mind responds to drugs. You'd think that we're dealing with some legislation, some laws that are like 30, 40 years old. Our understanding of mental health has gotten better in that period of time. You'd think that we would want to act a little faster on that stuff as opposed to just the guns. Well. There is, as I said, no indication as to what's going to happen. The bill expands the membership of the Board of Firearm Permit Examiners from 7 to include a mental health professional and a retired Superior Court judge. Wow. Okay. Again, there's no indication as to when exactly the governor would likely sign this piece of legislation into law. Speaking of the governor and legislation, lawmakers having reached a bipartisan agreement on gun violence doesn't prevent partisan bickering between the Democratic governor and the House Republican leader. Apparently, they're arguing over whose idea it was to put in certain provisions in the legislation. Shock, shock, surprise, surprise. Representative Lawrence Cafaro, the House Minority Leader, Republican from Norwalk, has indicated a desire to run for governor. Shock, shock, surprise, surprise. He would put his fingers on the authorship. One of the parts of the bill, as you might see, is the repeal of the early release program. Now, we've had this particular story on last week and a few weeks before, wherein there was legislation that was passed in 2011 that allowed for convicts to get out early if they followed through with certain programs while in prison and signed up for various programs. The legislation that is part of the comprehensive gun bill apparently is a removal of felons who commit violent crimes from that particular program. Representative Cafaro wants to take the responsibility for that provision. The governor also wants to take responsibility, pride of authorship, if you will, for that provision. So now they're getting into a little hissy fit over who said it first. Cafaro rejected the notion that the bill lawmakers intended to pass would merely codify department policy. In a phone interview, he ticked off a list of violent crimes someone can be convicted of and still participate in the program under the current law. In the bill that's before us tomorrow, they will no longer be eligible for early release. That doesn't sound like a technical change to me. Cafaro said that Malloy and other Democrats have fought efforts by Republicans to remove violent offenders from the program. He said he lost count of the number of amendments the minority party has proposed that would have accomplished the same thing had they not been voted down. To their credit, they've retreated, but they don't want it to look like a retreat. They realize the policy they put forth 2 years ago has failed. It's become a political embarrassment to them, and they finally agreed to repeal it. Well, one of the reasons why this has come to the forefront was that in the beginning of 2012, a violent offender apparently was released early, and he then proceeded several weeks after release to rob a small convenience store. Unfortunately, he didn't just rob the store. He also shot the owner dead. And that has given rise to an outcry, and an understandable outcry, as to this particular early release program. On the other side of the fence, Malloy and Michael Lawler, his undersecretary for criminal justice policy, said the administration had already proposed to change the statute regarding the program. Lawler supported separate legislation that would have changed it last month. And while violent inmates will not be able to be released before the 85% benchmark, in other words, they would have to serve 85% of their term before they could be considered for early release, he said that they still earn credits by participating in the programs. We want people in jail to get treatments and get education that makes it less likely that they will commit additional crimes when they get out of jail. That system will remain intact. Lawler said that the administration has been unable to find an example of a violent inmate who has been released sooner than he or she would have been before the program, but said that it could happen without statutory changes. Apparently, one of the provisions in the law is that you have to now have served 85% of your term. Oh, well. Well, we're going to take a quick break and pay some bills, and we will be back momentarily.
Fresh, organic, and homegrown. On the Horn. onthehorn.com.
Budwitz and Meyerjack PC is a large Connecticut-based CPA firm with offices in Cheshire and Farmington, Connecticut. Large enough to handle engagements of enterprises with annual revenues in excess of $100 million, yet small enough to cater to smaller businesses and individual clients who expect personalized attention from partners and staff. Client service is the cornerstone of our practice. Our clients have a fixed fee for their audit and tax work. What this means to the client is we're approachable. Personal communication and client services make for strong relationships. Budwitz and Meyerjack, certified public accountants.
Sandits Travel for business and leisure. We'll take you there. Sandits Travel has been proudly serving Connecticut since 1960. That's over 50 years. And we're ready for another 50 years of superior service. Whether you prefer to come in, call in, or log on, we invite you to explore how efficient, diverse, and fun it is to book through Sandits Travel. Save your money and your time with us. Sandits Travel. We'll take you there.
On the Horn. onthehorn.com.
We're also brought to you by Deepwater Seafood of Avon. Have you been to the only fish market in Farmington Valley? Deepwater is located on Route 44 and is open 6 days a week, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. and Saturdays, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. One of the best things about Deepwater is their fish are fresh. That's right. 3 deliveries daily to meet your needs. Deepwater has a menu of grilled fish items, scampi, fish and chips, soups, bisques, and chowders. For your catering needs, authentic paella, cedar plank salmon sides, and always the traditional New England clam bake. I can tell you, the last couple of days, it's been feeling a little bit more like spring, and clam bakes actually started coming to mind. And then it turned into winter again. Eesh. Deepwater also has the very best shrimp cocktail that you'll find anywhere. Call in your order at 860-676-9657, and they'll have your order ready for pickup when you arrive. Deepwater Seafood of Avon, not just for the halibut. And we're also brought to you by CentralCTDental.com. Doctors Camp, Sambor, and Lupini. For serious issues or routine checkups, go nowhere else. Easy to get to on the Plainville-Farmington line. Call 860-747-5761. Or make an appointment online at CentralCTDental.com. Well, good news on the budget front. I know we've been sadly lacking in that, but it also depends on what you describe as good news. What I would call good news is it was suddenly reported that we had no more deficit, that the economy was turning around. What passes for good news these days is, hey, we don't owe as much. The deficit's not quite as bad. Yeah. Well, in a letter to Governor Daniel P. Malloy, State Comptroller Kevin Lembo is projecting a $91.3 million budget deficit this year, a $40 million improvement over his projections for February. This means that during the month of March, we somehow did better by $40 million. Yeah, that's good news. Lembo expressed confidence for the first time on Monday that it was possible that the deficit could be eliminated entirely. That's good news. He said that the reduced deficit projection is almost entirely driven by revenue and is primarily is attributable to a $30 million gain in the inheritance tax collections. Ouch. If you're rich, don't die in Connecticut. By rich, that means having an estate that's worth more than $2 million. So if it's $2 million and one, get out. But increases in enrollment in the Medicare system still seem to control where the state will end up on June 30th. Ergo, whatever we're spending on Medicaid is going to have an impact on how much we end up being in the hole, if at all, at the end of the state's fiscal year, which is June 30th. Unanticipated increases in Medicaid caseload numbers throughout the year have produced most of the spending in excess of original budget projections, Lembo wrote in his monthly letter to Malloy. Office of Policy and Management Secretary Ben Barnes was even more optimistic earlier this month when he predicted that the state would end with a $33.6 million deficit. There's still a $57.7 million gap between his projection and Comptroller Lembo's. Lembo is still not as confident as the governor's budget director in the direction of state spending, which explains most of the differences in their numbers. But Lembo did give the Malloy administration credit for trying to hold down spending. It should be noted that both the actual expenditure growth trend through February and the OPM, Office of Policy and Management spending target, represent historically low rates of general fund spending growth, Lembo said in a press release. This low growth in spending has also helped to mitigate the fiscal 2013 deficit. About 65% of all state spending for the year occurs by the end of February. On the revenue side, the difference between Lembo and the administration is small. My revenue difference from OPM is relatively small and is driven by a generally improving collections outlook as I look at March receipts. Connecticut's economy is showing signs of moderate but steady recovery, Lembo wrote. The state added 700 jobs to payroll during the first 2 months of 2013. The unemployment rate in February was 8%, down from 8.2% at the close of 2012. Okay, there are signs that there is a general improvement, sort of, with the economy. I'm still not jumping up and down for joy. Because, again, all this news piece says is, we owe money, but we owe less. Yay. And last but not least, for those of you who look for the bronze look, or the brown look, or the really, really dark tan look, and you're a teenager, you're not going to be able to tan in Connecticut using a booth. Apparently, despite self-regulating efforts by the indoor tanning industry, the Public Health Committee moved forward Monday with SB 872, legislation banning the use of tanning devices for anyone under the age of 18. Hoping to head off strict regulations this year, the tanning industry has implemented self-policing measures requiring parental consent before minors are allowed to use indoor tanning devices. The voluntary measures have been adopted by at least 100 tanning salons across the state. But the committee voted 25 to 2. 25 to 2. Wow. To ban tanning for minors. Several lawmakers on the Public Health Committee commended the industry for its efforts, but said that banning indoor tanning for minors was an appropriate step to protect the public. The committee removed language from the bill that would have allowed people under the age of 18 to use tanning devices if they had a statement from a doctor. What doctor in his right mind would sign such a statement? Representative Philip Miller, Democrat from Essex, said that the evidence against tanning was stronger this year than when similar legislation came up in previous sessions. I don't think until now we had as much evidence that really shows in totality that this is a technology which can be very dangerous. Representative Whit Betts, Republican of Bristol, acknowledged that the self-policing efforts by the tanning industry, but said that he didn't think that they went far enough to protect minors. I'm not convinced that a lot of parents, frankly, are going to sign or really understand what they're going to be signing when they have their kid under the age of 18 going to indoor tanning. Representative Melissa Zybran, Republican of East Haddam, said that she understood the reasons for the bill, but thought that the decision to prohibit minors from tanning should be left up to their parents. Wow. I'm really concerned about the nanny state we seem to be becoming regarding taking away parental responsibility and those decisions from parents. the basic rationale is tanning booths can cause cancer. Indiscriminate use of tanning booths can cause premature aging, skin cancer, and other bad things. This is particularly bad for someone who isn't finished growing up yet. But we're a nanny state. We can't say, this really is a very bad idea and nobody should be allowed to do this. That's interesting. Tom Kelleher, who owns Tommy's Tanning, a chain of 14 salons and 14 locations in Connecticut, said that he was disappointed by the committee's decision to move the bill forward. He said lawmakers haven't given the tanning industry enough time to implement the self-imposed protocols regarding minors. The tanning industry is doing the responsible thing. They are self-regulating tanning by minors, he said. Kelleher asked that lawmakers give the industry until next year to present the Public Health Committee with a report on its minors protocol. Really? I don't think so. And last but not least, I know I said that earlier, but I can't let this one go. Apparently, Connecticut Light and Power and United Illuminating have asked regulators to pass on the losses that they incurred as a result of 5 major storms over the last 2 years. They would like to recover $414 million. The 5 major storms include Tropical Storm Irene, the October 2011 snowstorm from hell, and Superstorm Sandy. U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal and U.S. Representative Joe Courtney held a press conference yesterday to urge regulators not to pass the cost of storms on to ratepayers. In a letter to regulators, Blumenthal, Courtney, and U.S. Representative Rosa DeLauro noted that the Public Utility Regulatory Authority reviewed CLMP's performance after the October storm and found it to be deficient. The utility is seeking to collect $175 million in costs associated with that storm. It is simply inconceivable that any costs associated with this storm should be recognized or should be recovered from the same ratepayers who struggled without power and without any information on how much longer the utility would take to restore their electricity. You know, when I first read this, I was thinking initially, hey, storms happen. Damages from storms happen. Somebody's got to pay for them. The utilities, being a regulated industry, have a limited ability to generate profit, forcing them to pay for damage that was beyond their ability to control, arguably, is not logical, nor is it fair. But when you look at this particular situation through this particular lens, it took 10 days for them to restore public power to Simsbury, Connecticut. I know, because I lived in Simsbury at the time. And I remember the power came on. The storm arrived October 30th. Literally blew away Halloween in 2011. Almost blew away the elections. Sorry, the problem was that power was actually coming back on the day before Election Day, which happened to be November 8th. So October 30th, loss of power. 31st, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. Some folks actually didn't get their power turned on until November 8th. 10 days. And we kept being told, another couple days. Another couple days. Another couple days. So, from a purely visceral emotional viewpoint, yeah, I'm not sure I want CLMP to get $175 million for a job not well done. Blumenthal and Courtney also urged ratepayer funds not to be used for any expenses stemming from CLMP's failure to adequately communicate with local officials or to provide sufficient and timely resources in the aftermath of Storm Irene. Tropical Storm Irene was the first of 5 major storms, and it may have been the first indication that the utility was unprepared for widespread power outages. About 700,000 of its 1.2 million customers lost electricity in that storm. Then, less than 2 months later, the storm was hit by a nor'easter that knocked out power for more than 800,000 customers. Yeah, it was one of them. An independent report later revealed that the company hadn't planned for that many outages and were tardy in calling for outside help to ensure that it would arrive in a timely fashion. Instead of preparing for a storm where 500,000 customers would be out of power, the utility was prepared for a storm with more than 100,000 customers out of power, or about 10% of CLMP's customer base. According to the report commissioned by Governor Daniel P. Malloy, compiled by Witt Associates, preparing for a 10% outage was a dramatic underestimation. Wow. So I can see why our senior senator and one of our senior members of the congressional delegation are basically saying no to the rate increase requests. The utilities are trying to recover $175 million for the October 11th nor'easter snowstorm, $156 million for Storm Sandy, $111 million for Tropical Storm Irene, $11 million for a June 2011 storm, and $9 million for a September 2012 storm. I could see maybe $20 million. Maybe. Well, that about wraps it up. You've been listening to News Talk Tonight. I'm Dave Moore. You can follow us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. Basically, you can download us, and given the number of people who are watching tonight, that's probably how you're going to see tonight's show. We've been brought to you by Amazon.com, Gateway Financial Partners, Sandus Travels, Sherpa Technologies, Budwitz and Meyerjack CPAs, Deepwater Seafood of Avon, CentralCTDental.com. I was joined briefly tonight by special guest host Brian Parker, who called in from his car. I'll be back next week, hopefully with more viewers and with more news. Have a good night.
Fully operational. Fully engaged. On the horn. Hartford. onthehorn.com.